The moment that changed everything happened on a Wednesday morning in December when my courtroom doors opened and in walked someone who'd spent decades denying his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein despite overwhelming evidence, someone who'd called Epstein a terrific guy who liked women on the younger side, someone whose name appeared repeatedly in unsealed court documents and flight logs. Donald J. Trump, 78 years old, former President of the United States, real estate mogul, currently facing 91 federal criminal charges across 4 different cases. A man who'd built his career on denying, deflecting, and attacking anyone who questioned him. He walked in wearing his signature oversized suit and extra-long red tie, his orange-tinted face showing that familiar scowl, his hair meticulously styled to cover his balding scalp. Behind him came 12 attorneys from multiple firms, his current legal team that had been defending him across numerous cases, several Secret Service agents despite no longer being entitled to full presidential protection, his spokesperson, and a small army of MAGA supporters who'd somehow gotten into the courtroom gallery wearing Trump merchandise. But sitting across the aisle, looking dignified despite obvious trauma, was someone who represented the countless victims of Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking network. Victims whose lives had been destroyed while powerful men looked the other way or participated. Jessica Martinez, 34 years old now, but she'd been 14 when she was first trafficked to Mar-a-Lago by Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell in 2004. She'd been one of dozens of underage girls brought to Trump's Florida estate for what Maxwell called pool parties and what prosecutors now called organized sexual exploitation. The charges were criminal facilitation of sex trafficking of a minor, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. According to newly unsealed FBI documents and testimony from multiple victims, Trump had allowed Epstein and Maxwell to use Mar-a-Lago as a recruiting ground for underage girls throughout the early 2000s. Jessica's testimony, corroborated by other victims and staff members, described being brought to Mar-a-Lago by Maxwell at age 14, being introduced to Trump, and being told by Trump that she was very mature for her age before being directed to a private area where Epstein was waiting. More damning were the recently unsealed documents showing that when the FBI first investigated Epstein in 2005, Trump had called the lead investigator to suggest the case was overblown, that Epstein was being treated unfairly, and that teenage girls often pursued older wealthy men. Then in 2019, after Epstein's arrest and suspicious death, witnesses came forward claiming Trump's people had contacted them offering money to stay quiet about what they'd seen at Mar-a-Lago. And now Trump stood in my courtroom, clearly believing his former presidency, his wealth, his army of lawyers, his ability to delay and deflect that had worked for decades would make this disappear like everything else. What I did in the next 52 minutes didn't just shock the courtroom. It created a constitutional crisis, sparked the biggest political scandal in American history, forced conversations about whether former presidents can be held accountable for crimes committed before office, and proved that in America, when the system works correctly, no amount of political power, no former presidency, no cult of personality places anyone above the law when they facilitated the abuse of children. If you believe that being a former president doesn't exempt you from accountability for enabling sex trafficking, that powerful men who protected Jeffrey Epstein must face justice, that judges must defend victims even when facing the most politically powerful defendants in history, hit that subscribe button right now because what I'm about to do will show that even Donald Trump faces consequences. Mr. Trump, you're charged with criminal facilitation of sex trafficking of a minor, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation related to Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking network that operated in part from your Mar-a-Lago property. How do you plead? His lead attorney stood immediately. Jonathan Marks, one of several lawyers Trump had gone through during his various legal troubles. Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to these absolutely absurd, politically motivated charges. This is nothing more than another witch hunt, another desperate attempt by Trump's enemies to destroy him. President Trump barely knew Jeffrey Epstein. They were acquaintances in New York social circles decades ago, nothing more. The idea that President Trump had anything to do with Epstein's criminal activities is preposterous and defamatory. These charges are being brought now, conveniently, as President Trump is leading in presidential polls. This is election interference. This is the deep state trying to prevent the American people from choosing their leader. We will fight these false charges vigorously and we will win. Mr. Marks, your client was photographed with Epstein dozens of times. He flew on Epstein's plane. Epstein was a Mar-a-Lago member. Multiple witnesses place them together with underage girls. This isn't a witch hunt. This is a sex trafficking case. "Mr. Trump, how do you plead?" Trump stood, and when he spoke, his voice had that same aggressive certainty he'd used throughout his political career. "Not guilty. Totally not guilty. This is a disgrace. A complete and total disgrace. I barely knew Jeffrey Epstein. We were not friends. I banned him from Mar-a-Lago in 2007, which nobody wants to talk about. I was probably the only person who ever stood up to Epstein. Everyone else in New York was friends with him. The Clintons were best friends with him. Bill Clinton flew on his plane 26 times, went to his island. I never went to the island. Never. This whole case is a hoax. It's worse than the Russia hoax, worse than the impeachment hoax, worse than all the other hoaxes they've done to me. I'm being targeted because I'm letting in the polls. Because the American people want me back. So they make up these terrible, disgusting lies about me and Epstein. It's disgraceful what they're doing. Mr. Trump, we have evidence. Ms. Park, please present it." The prosecutor approached, a woman who'd spent years building cases against Epstein's network. "Your Honor, we have FBI documents that were sealed until last month, witness testimony from 7 victims including Ms. Martinez, testimony from 12 Mar-a-Lago staff members, flight logs, photographs, phone records, and recorded conversations. May I present them?" I nodded. The lights dimmed. The first piece of evidence was a photograph from 1992. Trump and Epstein at a Mar-a-Lago party, surrounded by young women who looked barely legal, both men laughing, clearly comfortable together. The photo had been published before, but new testimony from the photographer revealed that several of the women in the photo had been underage, brought there by Maxwell. The second photo was from 1997. Trump, Epstein, and Maxwell at Trump Tower. Again surrounded by very young-looking women. A former Trump assistant testified that this party was specifically organized to introduce Epstein to New York modeling agencies, many of which recruited underage girls. The third piece of evidence was video footage that had recently been obtained from a 2000 party at Mar-a-Lago. The video showed Trump and Epstein standing close, talking and laughing while young women danced around them. The audio was partial but clear enough. Trump's voice telling Epstein that he liked them young too, that they were both fortunate men, that Mar-a-Lago had the best selection. Epstein laughing, agreeing, saying Trump knew how to throw a party. Then came the flight logs. While Trump had repeatedly claimed he never flew on Epstein's plane, the logs showed 7 flights between 1997 and 2005. Not as many as Clinton, but 7 documented trips from New York to Florida on what victims called the Lolita Express. The most damning evidence came next. FBI documents from the original 2005 investigation. Multiple teenage victims had mentioned Mar-a-Lago in their initial interviews. One 14-year-old had described being brought there by Maxwell, being introduced to Trump at the pool, Trump commenting on her physical development, then Maxwell leading her to a private bungalow where Epstein was waiting. The FBI documents showed that when investigators tried to interview Mar-a-Lago staff about Epstein's activities there, they were stonewalled. Several employees who initially agreed to cooperate suddenly refused, some citing fear of losing their jobs. And buried in the documents was a memo about a phone call the lead FBI agent received from Trump himself. The prosecutor read the memo aloud. Subject: Trump called this investigator directly to discuss the Epstein matter. Subject stated that he believed the investigation was targeting Epstein unfairly. Subject claimed that the alleged victims were often young women who pursued wealthy older men seeking financial benefits. Subject suggested that Epstein's lifestyle was being criminalized when similar behavior by other wealthy men was ignored. Subject asked if this investigation was politically motivated given Epstein's connections to Democrats. When investigator explained this was a sex trafficking case involving minors, not political, subject became defensive and ended the call. Investigator notes that subject's call was highly unusual and appeared to be an attempt to influence the investigation. The courtroom stirred. Trump's supporters in the gallery were yelling that it was fake, that the FBI was corrupt. I gavelled for order. The next evidence was even worse. Testimony from Jessica Martinez, taken in a videotaped deposition because she was too traumatized to appear in person initially. The video showed a young woman, now 34, describing being recruited by Maxwell at a West Palm Beach shopping mall when she was 14. Maxwell had approached her, complimented her appearance, asked if she'd ever modeled, offered her $200 to give an old man a massage. Jessica described being driven to Mar-a-Lago, being brought through a side entrance, being told to change into a bikini. She described being brought to the pool area where Trump was sitting with several men. She described Maxwell introducing her as a new friend, Trump looking her up and down, commenting that she was very pretty, very mature looking, asking her age. When Jessica said she was 14, Trump had smiled and said 14 going on 24, very impressive, before turning back to his conversation. Jessica described Maxwell then leading her to a private bungalow, telling her to wait there, that a nice man would arrive soon who just wanted a massage. The man was Epstein. What happened next was sexual abuse that Jessica described through tears, abuse that continued multiple times over the next year, always at Mar-a-Lago or at Epstein's Palm Beach mansion. Jessica's testimony included a crucial detail. After one of the massages in 2005, when she was 15, she'd been leaving Mar-a-Lago through the main entrance by mistake. Trump had seen her, asked Maxwell why the young one was leaving through the front. Maxwell had laughed it off, said the girl had gotten confused. Trump had said they needed to be more careful, that people noticed young girls, that they should use the beach entrance. Multiple other victims gave similar testimony. 7 women, all now adults, all describing being brought to Mar-a-Lago as minors, being introduced to Trump making comments about their appearance or age, then being directed to areas where Epstein was waiting. Former Mar-a-Lago employees testified too. A housekeeper described being told to prepare certain rooms when Epstein visited, being told that young guests would be arriving and to make sure they weren't disturbed. A pool attendant described seeing Epstein with very young girls multiple times, Trump occasionally joining them, always acting like everything was normal. Then came the obstruction evidence. After Epstein's 2019 arrest, several witnesses who'd been preparing to testify received threatening calls. One former Mar-a-Lago employee was told that Trump had very powerful friends who remembered who was loyal and who wasn't. Another received an anonymous envelope with $25,000 cash and a note saying more would come if they forgot what they'd seen. Phone records showed calls from Trump's personal cell phone to several witnesses in the weeks after Epstein's death. The witnesses testified that Trump had called personally, reminiscing about old times, asking what they remembered about Epstein's visits, suggesting that memories fade over time, that it would be unfortunate if false allegations hurt innocent people. When the lights came back on, the courtroom was in chaos. Trump's supporters were yelling. Media were frantically typing. Trump himself was red-faced, angry, pointing at the prosecutor. "Mr. Trump, you just saw evidence of your close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. You saw testimony from 7 victims who were brought to your property as children. You saw documentation of you trying to influence the FBI investigation. You saw evidence of witness intimidation. Do you still claim you barely knew Epstein?" Jonathan Marks stood quickly. "Your Honor, this evidence is taken completely out of context. Yes, President Trump knew Jeffrey Epstein socially. Many people did. Epstein was a fixture in New York and Palm Beach high society for decades. The idea that President Trump knew about or participated in Epstein's crimes is absurd. President Trump banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago when he learned about improper behavior. That shows President Trump's character. The witness testimony is from people who are being paid to lie, who want attention, who hate President Trump politically. The phone calls were innocent conversations with old employees. This entire case is a frame job. Mr. Marks, 7 victims independently described similar experiences at Mar-a-Lago. The FBI documented your client's interference. This isn't a frame job. This is a sex trafficking case. Ms. Martinez, please approach." Jessica stood from the gallery where she'd been sitting silently and walked forward. She was small, maybe 5 feet 4 inches, and moved with the careful control of someone who'd been hurt badly and learned to protect herself. She wore a simple dress and no makeup, and when she looked at me, her eyes held the pain of someone who'd been betrayed by every powerful person who was supposed to protect her. "Ms. Martinez, I know this is difficult. Tell me what happened to you." She spoke quietly, her voice steady, but you could hear the effort it took. "Your Honor, I was 14 years old when Ghislaine Maxwell approached me at a mall in West Palm Beach. I was with my mom. We didn't have much money. My mom worked as a hotel maid. When this sophisticated British woman started talking to me, complimenting me, saying I could make money modeling, it felt like a dream. Maxwell gave me her card, told me to call her without my mom around, said she had opportunities for mature young girls. I called. She picked me up a few days later, drove me to Mar-a-Lago. I'd never been somewhere so fancy. She told me I'd meet important people, that I could make $200 just for giving an old man a massage, that rich men liked pretty young girls around. When we got there, she brought me to the pool. There were several men there, all older, all in expensive clothes. One of them was Donald Trump. I recognized him from TV. Maxwell introduced me, said I was her new friend. Trump looked at me in a way that made me uncomfortable. Not like an adult looks at a child. Like a man looks at a woman. He asked how old I was. I told him 14. He smiled and said I looked older, very mature, very developed for my age. Her voice cracked slightly. Then Maxwell took me to a bungalow, told me to change into a bikini, told me a nice gentleman would arrive for a massage. The gentleman was Jeffrey Epstein. What he did to me that day wasn't a massage. It was sexual abuse. I was 14 years old and a 50-year-old man raped me. It happened again and again. Over the next year, Maxwell would call me, offer me money, bring me to Mar-a-Lago or to Epstein's house. Every time, there was abuse. Sometimes Epstein, sometimes other men, always at Trump's property or Epstein's property. One time, I was leaving through the wrong door, the front entrance instead of the side. Trump saw me. He asked Maxwell why I was leaving that way. He said they needed to be more careful, that young girls coming and going looked suspicious. That's when I realized he knew. He knew I was 14. He knew Epstein was abusing me. And he helped hide it. Tears streamed down her face now. I'm 34 years old now. I've been in therapy for 15 years. I have PTSD. I have nightmares. I can't have normal relationships. My childhood was stolen by Jeffrey Epstein and the powerful men who enabled him. And Donald Trump was one of those men. She looked directly at Trump, who was staring at his phone, scrolling through what looked like Truth Social. Mr. Trump, you knew. You saw me. You commented on my body when I was 14 years old. You told Maxwell to be more careful about hiding us. You protected Jeffrey Epstein for years. And when the FBI investigated, you tried to stop them. You're as guilty as Epstein. You just had better lawyers and more power. The courtroom was completely silent. Even Trump's supporters had stopped yelling. I looked at Trump, who finally looked up from his phone, his face showing anger rather than remorse. Mr. Trump, you heard Ms. Martinez's testimony. She was 14 years old when she was trafficked to your property. She says you knew. What do you have to say? He stood, and his face was purple with rage. This is a lie. A complete and total lie. I never saw this woman before in my life. She's being paid to say this. Probably by the Democrats, probably by my political enemies. This is what they do. They find people to make up stories, they coach them, they pay them, and they parade them in front of cameras to destroy me. I banned Jeffrey Epstein from Mar-a-Lago. Everyone knows this. I was the only one who stood up to him. And now I'm being accused of helping him? It's disgusting. It's a disgrace. This woman is lying for money and attention. Mr. Trump, 6 other victims told identical stories. They can't all be lying. They're all being paid. This is a coordinated attack. This is the deep state trying to stop me from being president again because they know I'll drain the swamp. Mr. Trump, this is a criminal trial about sex trafficking. This isn't about politics. Everything is about politics when you're Donald Trump. Everything is an attack. And I will not be destroyed by lies from people who want to take down the greatest president in American history. Mr. Trump, stand up straight. He was already standing, puffing his chest out. Mr. Trump, you're 78 years old. You were President of the United States. You've wielded more power than almost any American in history. And you used that power to protect a pedophile, to facilitate the abuse of children, to obstruct justice, and to intimidate witnesses. Here is my finding. You are guilty of criminal facilitation of sex trafficking of minors. The testimony from 7 victims, corroborated by staff and documented by FBI, proves you knowingly allowed Epstein to use Mar-a-Lago for trafficking. You are guilty of obstruction of justice for your 2005 call to the FBI attempting to influence their investigation. You are guilty of witness intimidation for your contacts with witnesses after Epstein's arrest. His face went from red to purple. This is rigged. This whole trial is rigged. You're a corrupt judge. This is a kangaroo court. Mr. Trump, control yourself. I will not control myself. This is America being stolen. This is justice being destroyed. I'm innocent and everyone knows it. Mr. Trump, you're about to find out what justice looks like. Here is your sentence. For criminal facilitation of sex trafficking of minors, 15 years in federal prison. For obstruction of justice, 5 years consecutive. For witness intimidation, 5 years consecutive. Total of 25 years in federal custody. The courtroom exploded like I'd never seen. Trump's supporters were screaming, some trying to rush forward before being stopped by marshals. His attorneys were yelling about appeals, about constitutional crisis, about political persecution. Trump himself looked genuinely shocked, his mouth hanging open, unable to speak for the first time in his life. Jonathan Marks was screaming over the chaos. Your Honor, 25 years for a former president? This is unprecedented. This is unconstitutional. You cannot imprison a former president. We will appeal to the Supreme Court. This will be overturned. Mr. Marks, your client facilitated the sexual abuse of children. Former presidents are not above the law. Additionally, I'm ordering Mr. Trump to pay $50 million in restitution to be divided among the victims. I'm ordering the seizure of Mar-a-Lago property as it was used in the commission of these crimes. And I'm forwarding all evidence to federal prosecutors for potential additional charges related to the trafficking network. Trump found his voice, bellowing now. You can't take Mar-a-Lago. That's my home. That's worth $1 billion. This is theft. This is communism. This is exactly what I warned America about. Mr. Trump, Mar-a-Lago was used to traffic children. It's being seized under federal trafficking laws. Marshals, take him into custody. Federal marshals moved forward. Trump backed away, looking at his Secret Service agents, but they stood aside. This is illegal. I'm a former president. You can't handcuff a former president. Mr. Trump, watch me. As they handcuffed him, he was still yelling. This is the greatest injustice in American history. I'm innocent. Everyone knows I'm innocent. This will be overturned. I'll be president again. You'll all pay for this. Jessica was still at the witness stand, tears streaming down her face. Trump looked at her as marshals led him past. You're a liar. A total liar. And everyone will know it when I'm freed. The doors closed on a former president of the United States being led to prison, still claiming innocence, still attacking his victim, still believing somehow his power would save him. Within an hour, America was in chaos. News networks interrupted everything for breaking coverage. Social media crashed from traffic. Trump's supporters claimed this was a coup. His opponents said finally, justice. Constitutional scholars debated whether a former president could be imprisoned. Political violence broke out in several cities. But in the chaos, something else happened. 43 more Epstein victims came forward, encouraged by Jessica's courage. They named other powerful men. Princes, politicians, CEOs. The entire network started to unravel. Donald Trump is currently being held at FCI but are awaiting appeal. Mar-a-Lago has been seized and is being sold, with proceeds going to victim compensation. Jessica Martinez received her portion of the restitution and has become an advocate for trafficking victims. If this story moved you, subscribe. Share it with anyone who needs to understand that no one is above the law, that former presidents who enabled child abuse must face justice, that power doesn't protect predators forever. Donald Trump used his wealth and influence to protect Jeffrey Epstein. I gave him 25 years in prison and proved that in America, even presidents face consequences for their crimes.